42% of vehicles on North American roads right now are operating with at least one fluid that is chemically spent, oxidized, or critically low. That isn't a statistic about neglectful owners. It's a statistic about people who believe they are doing everything right, while their seals are hardening and their bearings are microscopic levels away from seizing. You see it every day in the shop, engines that should have gone 300,000 miles being dragged in for a scrap value trade-in because the owner followed the light on the dash and nothing else. It starts with a faint ticking you can only hear in the drive-thru, or a slight shudder when the torque converter tries to lock up on a cold morning. You ignore it because the car still starts. It still gets you to work, and the bill for a diagnostic feels like a scam. But that silence isn't health. It's just the delay between the start of the wear and the moment the metal finally gives up. Drivers have been conditioned to think cars are appliances that either work or don't work. But a high-mileage vehicle is a living history of every time you pushed it too hard before the oil was warm, or let a leak monitor itself for 6 months. There is a specific reason why the guy down the street has a truck with 400,000 miles on the original transmission while yours is slipping at 90,000, and it isn't luck. It's a series of invisible habits that feel redundant until they become the only thing standing between you and a $5,000 engine replacement. Most people don't realize they're killing their cars until the damage is already irreversible. And by the time the check engine light flashes, you aren't paying for a repair. You're paying for years of arrogance. Secret number 9. Ignore scheduled maintenance. It starts when you look at the little sticker in the corner of your windshield and realize you are 1,000 miles over, but the car feels exactly the same as it did last month. You tell yourself that modern oils are better than they used to be, and that skipping one interval to save $80 is a smart move for your monthly budget. This is the moment where the internal decay begins. You are not just pushing your oil a little further, you are allowing the additive packages to deplete until they can no longer keep carbon and soot in suspension. Inside your engine, that oil is slowly turning from a lubricant into a grinding paste. As it heat cycles beyond its intended lifespan, it begins to polymerize and stick to the internal surfaces. It coats the oil rings on your pistons and starts to bake onto the valve stems. You will not hear the friction increasing, and you will not see the microscopic shavings of bearing material being carried through your oil galleries. But the damage is cumulative. By the time the oil light flickers, or you notice a faint ticking sound at idle, the polished surfaces of your camshafts are already scarred. When drivers finally see a puff of blue smoke, or feel a loss of power, they try to fix it by finally getting that oil change. But a fresh gallon of oil cannot grow back the metal you have already lost. You might spend $2,000 on a top-end rebuild to fix a smoking valve guide, but the bottom end of the engine has already been stressed. The contamination has set a baseline of wear that will shorten the life of every moving part. Most people do not realize that once that sludge starts to form, you are just managing a slow-motion failure. If you think skipping a simple fluid swap is a gamble you can win, wait until you see how a single habit at the start of your day is actually stretching your engine components to their breaking point. Secret number 8. Spinning the engine hard at startup. You are running late for work, and it is 30 degrees outside, so you jump in, twist the key, and immediately rev the engine to merge into traffic. It feels like you are just getting the car up to operating temperature faster. But to a mechanic, it sounds like a scream for help. When an engine sits overnight, the oil drains away from the top end and the cylinder walls, leaving only a microscopic film behind. Until the oil pump can build pressure and push that cold, thick fluid through the tiny passages of your bearings, your engine is essentially running metal on metal. The mechanical reality here is a matter of thermal expansion. Your pistons are usually made of aluminum, and they heat up and expand much faster than the heavy iron or steel engine block. When you demand high RPMs immediately, those pistons expand against cold cylinder walls that have not had time to grow. This creates immense lateral pressure on the piston skirts and the rings. You are essentially trying to jam a warm peg into a cold hole, and the friction generated in those first 60 seconds is equivalent to 500 miles of steady highway driving. You will not notice the effects of this for years. It shows up eventually as increased oil consumption or an erratic idle that your local shop cannot seem to find a vacuum leak for. What is actually happening is that your cylinder walls have become egg-shaped and your rings have lost their tension. A premature engine rebuild for a worn bottom end can easily cost $5,000, all because you wanted to save 3 minutes of idling in your driveway. Even if you are patient with your startup, the way you behave once you are on the road is likely shaking the very foundation of your car's chassis. Secret number 7. Aggressive driving and hard braking. There is a common belief that if a car is built to handle a certain speed or braking force, using that full range every day is perfectly fine. You treat every green light like a drag strip and every red light like a short track finish line. You think you are just being an assertive driver, but your suspension bushings and engine mounts are absorbing the cost of that aggression. Every time you bury the throttle, you are sending a shockwave through the drivetrain, stressing the CV joints and the internal clutches of your transmission. When you slam on the brakes at the last second, you are not just wearing down the friction material. You are generating massive amounts of heat that soak into the hub assemblies, the wheel bearings, and the brake rotors themselves. Over time, this heat causes the rotors to warp, leading to a steering wheel shake that feels like the front end is falling apart. On an aging vehicle, replacing warped rotors, seized calipers, and worn-out control arm bushings can quickly climb toward $1,500. The real problem is that this aggressive cycle stresses the metal components until they develop microfractures. You will notice the car starts to feel loose or wanders in its lane, and no amount of new tires or alignments will bring back that factory feel because the mounting points have been hammered out of spec. This loss of structural integrity is what makes a car feel old and used up long before the odometer hits the big numbers. If you think your driving style is the only thing stressing the hardware, you are ignoring the chemical warfare happening inside your fuel system every time you try to save a nickel at the pump. Secret number 6. Using wrong oil or late changes. I see a lot of guys who think they know better than the engineers who designed the engine. They will use a thicker weight oil because they think it protects better in the summer, or they buy the cheapest house brand oil because they plan on changing it eventually. They treat oil like a commodity, rather than a specific liquid component of the engine's design. Modern engines use oil pressure to timing chain tensioners and variable valve timing solenoids. If the viscosity is off by even a small margin, those systems will not function correctly. As that oil stays in the crankcase too long, the detergents and dispersants break down completely. This allows carbon deposits to settle in the most inconvenient places, like the tiny screens that protect your turbocharger oil feed lines. Once those screens clog, your turbo starves of oil and fails, which is a $3,000 repair that could have been avoided with a $50 jug of the correct synthetic. The friction increases, the internal heat rises, and the seals throughout the engine start to harden and leak. By the time you see spots on the garage floor, the damage is widespread. You can try to switch back to the high-quality stuff, but the cheap oil has already left behind a layer of varnish that restricts flow. You are essentially forcing your engine to breathe through a straw. People usually blame the manufacturer for a leaky engine, but the truth is usually sitting in a dusty bottle of the wrong oil on their garage shelf. While you are worrying about the fluids, the brain of your car is likely sending out warning signals that you are choosing to ignore because the car still seems to drive. Secret number 5. Ignoring small electrical and sensor issues. A check engine light is not a suggestion. It is a report from a computer that is trying to prevent a catastrophic failure. Many drivers see a light for an oxygen sensor or a generic lean code and decide to ignore it because the car still gets them to work. They think it is just a nuisance or an emissions gimmick. In reality, when a sensor fails, the engine computer defaults to a limp home mode or a rich fuel map to protect the engine from melting down. This means you are dumping excess raw fuel into the cylinders. That fuel does not just burn off. It washes the lubricating oil off the cylinder walls, leading to rapid ring wear. It also travels down the exhaust and burns up inside your catalytic converter. What could have been a $100 sensor replacement quickly turns into a $1,200 exhaust job and potentially permanent damage to your piston walls. The car might feel a little sluggish, but you tell yourself it is just getting old. This is where the repair bills start to cascade. One ignored sensor leads to a fouled spark plug, which leads to a stressed ignition coil, which eventually burns out a driver in the engine control module. Now you are looking at a total electrical system overhaul. You cannot just clear the code and expect the physical wear to disappear. By the time the light is flashing, you have already spent the money. You just haven't realized it yet. I am going to ask you to do something for me if you want to keep that car on the road. If you find this kind of blunt mechanical truth helpful, hit the subscribe button. I am here to make sure you are the one who decides when your car is finished, not a repair bill you can't afford. Now, even if your sensors are perfect, what you are putting into the tank might be slowly choking the life out of your fuel injectors. Secret number 4. Poor fuel quality and infrequent filter changes. There is a reason the top-tier fuel standard exists, but most people just look for the lowest price on the sign. Cheap fuel often lacks the necessary detergents to keep your intake valves and fuel injectors clean. Over thousands of miles, a layer of carbon builds up on the back of the valves like a crusty sponge, soaking up fuel and disrupting the airflow into the combustion chamber. This leads to a rough idle and a loss of fuel economy that most people just accept as part of owning a high-mileage car. The fuel filter is another forgotten component. People assume that since modern gas is relatively clean, the filter lasts forever. But as a pump ages, it can shed tiny particles of metal, and the gas station's underground tanks can have sediment and moisture. A clogged filter makes the fuel pump work twice as hard to maintain pressure. Eventually, the pump burns out, leaving you stranded on the side of the highway and facing a $700 bill for a new pump and labor. When the injectors get dirty, they stop spraying a fine mist and start dripping fuel. This creates hot spots on the piston crowns that can actually burn a hole straight through the metal over time. You will not notice the uneven spray pattern until the engine starts misfiring under load, and by then, the carbon buildup is so thick that a simple bottle of fuel system cleaner in the tank will not touch it. You are looking at a teardown just to clean the intake tract. The way you use your car on a daily basis is just as important as what you put in it, and your short commute might be the very thing killing your oil. Secret number 3. Road-only, short trips, and imbalanced driving. Most people think that low mileage is always better, but a car that only drives 3 miles to the grocery store and back is often in worse shape than a highway commuter. When you run an engine for only 10 minutes, it never reaches a full, stabilized operating temperature. This means the moisture that naturally accumulates in the crankcase from combustion blow-by never has a chance to evaporate. That water mixes with the oil to form a milky acid that eats away at your bearings while the car is parked. Furthermore, the exhaust system never gets hot enough to burn off the condensation inside the mufflers and pipes. This causes them to rust from the inside out. You might look at your exhaust and think it looks fine, but the internal baffles are rotting away, leading to an expensive replacement. Short trips also mean your battery never gets a full charge from the alternator, leading to a constant state of undercharge that kills the lead acid plates years before their time. I have seen engines with only 50,000 miles on them that are completely filled with sludge because they never went on a long enough drive to boil off the contaminants. You think you are saving the car by not driving it much, but you are actually allowing it to decay in place. If you do not give the car a good 30-minute run at highway speeds at least once a week, you are basically asking for an early grave for your drivetrain. But as bad as short trips are, nothing destroys a transmission faster than asking it to do more work than it was ever designed for. Secret number 2. Overloading your car and towing beyond limits. We all have that weekend where we need to haul a load of mulch or tow a trailer that is just a little bit too heavy. You think that because the car can move the load, it is okay to do it. But your cooling system and your transmission were engineered for a specific gross vehicle weight. When you exceed that, the heat generation inside the transmission fluid spikes almost instantly. Once that fluid hits a certain temperature, its chemical structure changes, and it loses its ability to protect the delicate clutches and planetary gears. You might not feel the transmission slipping today, but you have baked the internal seals. They will eventually go hard and brittle, leading to internal pressure losses that manifest as a harsh shift or a delayed engagement. By the time you notice the transmission is acting up, the damage is already done. A remanufactured transmission for a modern vehicle is easily a $4,000 expense, and that is before you add the labor to pull the old one out. Your suspension also takes a permanent hit. Coil springs and struts have a memory, and once you have compressed them past their limit with a heavy load, they rarely return to their original ride height. This ruins your suspension geometry, eats your tires from the inside out, and makes the car feel unstable. People try to fix this with a cheap alignment, but you cannot align a car that has sagging springs. You are paying for your heavy load for the next 5 years in tire wear. Even with all these mechanical mistakes, the biggest reason cars fail to hit 500k miles is a psychological one that happens right in your own driveway. Secret number 1. Treating every problem with band-aids instead of diagnoses. This is the habit that kills more cars than any other. It is the mindset of fixing the symptom instead of the cause. Your car starts squeaking, so you spray some lubricant on the belt. The car starts losing coolant, so you pour in a bottle of stop leak. Your battery dies, so you just jump start it and keep going. You are treating your car like a collection of parts rather than a synchronized system. Every time you use a quick fix, you are allowing the underlying failure to grow. Using stop leak is a classic example. It might stop the drip from your radiator for a month, but it also clogs the tiny passages in your heater core and reduces the cooling efficiency of your entire engine. Now, instead of a $200 radiator, you have a head gasket that is ready to blow because the engine is running 20 degrees hotter than it should. You have traded a minor inconvenience for a terminal illness. Drivers do this because they are afraid of the real repair cost, but the irony is that the Band-Aid is what makes the final bill unaffordable. When you finally take the car to a professional, the mechanic has to undo all of your temporary fixes before they can even start on the original problem. This is why people give up on their cars at 180 miles. It isn't that the car is worn out. It is that it has a dozen overlapping, unresolved issues that have become too expensive to untangle. The moment you decide to stop diagnosing and start guessing with cheap fixes is the moment your car's countdown to the junkyard begins. If you have already been doing this for a year, the internal damage might already be too far gone to reach that 500,000-mile goal. Thank you for watching. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from and what year and model of vehicle you are trying to keep on the road. If you found this useful, give it a like and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into keeping your vehicle out of the scrapyard.